Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something that I think is really important and relevant to a lot of people's lives. We're going to be taking a deep dive into a Reddit post where someone is asking for advice on how to get out of an abusive marriage. And I have to say, this post really stopped me in my scroll. It's about a 25-year-old woman married for 6 years to a 23-year-old man, and the abuse she describes is really just heartbreaking.
It's a reminder that, abuse can often begin, very early in life and can escalate very, very quickly.
Exactly. And she talks about sexual assault, physical violence like choking, constant verbal abuse, and even witnessing him abuse their dog. She really wants to get out of this situation, but she's terrified.
Yeah.
And so that's where the Reddit community comes in, offering all sorts of advice and support.
Yeah. It's really a testament to the power of these online communities to be able to provide some guidance and some hope in times when things feel really, really dark.
Absolutely. So let's unpack some of the key advice that was given in the comments. And one comment that jumped out at me immediately said, "Get out NOW, take the dog and run."
Hmm.
It's so short and to the point, and it really emphasizes the urgency of the situation.
Yeah, and that urgency is so crucial because domestic violence is, rarely a static situation. The abuser's behavior very often escalates over time, and so early intervention is absolutely critical for safety.
Okay, this next comment really hit me. It says, "Don't fall for the 'I'll change, let's go to therapy' routine. Actions speak louder than words." And what I find so interesting about this piece of advice is that it challenges the idea that therapy is always the answer.
Yeah, and you're right. Couples counseling can be incredibly helpful in many relationships. But in situations involving active abuse, it's actually dangerous and ineffective. Abusers can really manipulate therapy to maintain that control and put the victim at even greater risk.
That makes a lot of sense. Another common piece of advice that I saw repeated over and over again was document everything. Photos, texts, anything that can serve as evidence. I can see why this would be important, but what specifically can that documentation be used for?
Well, documentation is absolutely crucial for legal purposes. It can be really helpful in securing a restraining order, providing evidence, in potential legal proceedings to make sure that the victim has that protection they need and to hold the abuser accountable.
So we're already seeing a pattern here, right?
Yeah.
Leave immediately, document everything, and don't fall for the manipulation tactics. It's all really life-saving advice that just appears repeatedly in these comments.
And it highlights, I think, the collective wisdom of the community, recognizing the gravity of the situation and offering practical advice, based on probably shared experiences.
Now, a lot of the comments also urged her to contact a domestic violence hotline or legal aid. I think these resources are obviously crucial, but what kind of specific support can these organizations offer?
These organizations are really lifelines for people in these situations. They provide a range of services, including safe housing, legal advice, emotional support. They even offer, help with things like creating a safety plan or navigating the legal system.
Wow. So it's really not just about escaping the situation. It's about having the resources to rebuild your life after you get out.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is a really great place to start. They offer 24/7 support, and they have a wealth of information available on their website.
And I think it's important to mention that, reaching out for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. It takes a lot of courage to acknowledge the situation and seek that support. It's really the first step toward breaking free from this cycle of abuse.
It really is all about reclaiming your power and taking control of your life.
Yeah.
One thing that really stood out to me was how many people emphasize taking the dog when she leaves. I mean, it might seem like a small detail, but
It's actually a very significant indicator. Abuse often extends beyond the immediate partner and harming a pet. It can be a signal of the potential for that violence to escalate and be directed towards the victim.
oh, wow. That is a very chilling thought, but it really does underline the importance of removing both the victim and any vulnerable beings from that environment, from that dangerous environment.
Yes. It's about understanding that abuser's mindset
Hmm.
and recognizing that, the potential for violence doesn't always stop with the primary target.
Yeah, one thing that kept coming up over and over again was the need for secrecy when planning an escape. Several people warned against telling the abuser about the intention to leave. Why is that so crucial?
Because informing the abuser can drastically increase the risk of violence. It often triggers a sense of panic and control, making the situation much more volatile. The element of surprise, while difficult, is often essential for ensuring a safe escape.
So it's about strategically prioritizing safety above all else.
Exactly. It's about understanding those dynamics of abuse and taking the steps to minimize risk. Leaving an abusive situation is rarely ever simple, and it often requires a level of planning and secrecy that can be very emotionally challenging, but ultimately it can be life-saving.
Yeah. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there is so much more to unpack. In the next part of this deep dive, we're going to be exploring the complexities of why leaving can be so challenging, the common tactics that abusers use to maintain control, and the resources that are available to help survivors break free.
Yeah, it's a crucial conversation, and we hope you'll stick with us as we delve deeper into this important topic.
And before we move on, I want to remind you that if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, you are not alone. Please reach out for help. You can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline or visit their website for resources and support. Your safety is paramount.
And if you're finding this deep dive helpful and you want to explore more topics like this, be sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul and check out the Shauna Palaj YouTube channel for more insightful content.
We'll be back after a short break to continue this important discussion. Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, it's easy to say just leave when we talk about abusive relationships. But as we saw in those Reddit comments, it is so much more complicated than that. Fear, isolation, financial dependence, emotional manipulation, all of these things can make leaving incredibly difficult.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Leaving is rarely a single action. It's a process. It requires careful planning, immense courage, and a strong support system.
Definitely. And, it's important to remember that abusers are master manipulators. They often use a combination of tactics to try to exert control and maintain their dominance over the victim. Several comments mentioned gaslighting, which I find fascinating and kind of terrifying. Can you break down what that looks like in an abusive relationship?
Absolutely. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where the abuser is actually distorting reality, making the victim doubt their own sanity. They might deny events that happened or twist narratives or even blame the victim for the abuse itself. It can be really
Oh,
insidious.
wow. So it's not just about physical violence. It's about systematically breaking down the victim's sense of self and their reality. No wonder it makes leaving so hard.
Right. The victim is constantly second-guessing themselves, which makes it much harder to trust their instincts and to seek help.
It's just heartbreaking. And then when you add things like financial control, where the abuser is limiting the victim's access to money or preventing them from working, it creates this sense of complete dependence.
Yeah. Financial control is a very powerful tool for abusers because it really traps the victim in a situation where they feel like they have no options, even if they desperately want to leave.
Right. A few of the comments talked about the importance of support systems in escaping abusive relationships. Why is that so crucial?
Because strong support systems can truly be a lifeline for victims. Friends, family, even those online communities we talked about, they all play a role in counteracting that isolation that abusers so often create. They provide validation, encouragement, and practical assistance, reminding the victim that they're not alone.
So it's about breaking through that bubble of isolation that the abusers created and reminding the victim that there is a whole world out there that wants to help.
Yes, precisely. It's about rebuilding those connections and creating a safety net that can really support the victim as they navigate this incredibly difficult process of leaving.
And that's where resources like domestic violence hotlines and support groups come in, right? They provide that safe space to connect with others who understand the complexities of escaping abuse.
Exactly. They can also offer professional guidance on, things like developing safety plans or navigating legal proceedings or accessing essential resources like housing and financial assistance. And they also offer emotional support, which is absolutely crucial for healing and recovery.
Absolutely. One comment mentioned the cycle of abuse, which I think is really important to understand. Can you walk us through what that looks like?
Sure. The cycle of abuse is this recurring pattern of tension building, abuse, and then reconciliation that very often characterizes these relationships. It starts with a gradual increase in tension and control, followed by an episode of violence. And that could be physical, emotional, or sexual. And then comes what's often referred to as the honeymoon phase, where the abuser apologizes, promises to change, and showers the victim with affection.
So it's like this manipulative dance where the victim is constantly on edge, hoping for that brief period of calm.
Exactly. And that honeymoon phase can be incredibly deceptive because it gives the victim false hope that maybe the abuse is over. But then the cycle just repeats, and very often the abuse escalates in severity each time.
It's a really heartbreaking pattern, and it highlights why leaving can be so challenging. There's that constant push and pull and this hope that things will get better, even though the reality is that the abuse is likely to continue.
You're right. And breaking free from that cycle requires recognizing that pattern, understanding that the abuser's promises are very often empty.
Now, this next concept is one that I think a lot of people might find really difficult to grasp. It's this idea of the trauma bond. What exactly is a trauma bond, and how does it develop in these situations?
So a trauma bond is a complex psychological phenomenon where the victim actually develops an unhealthy attachment to their abuser. And it often develops as a coping mechanism for this constant cycle of abuse and reconciliation that we just talked about.
So it's almost like a twisted form of loyalty, where the victim feels obligated to the abuser even though they're being mistreated.
In a way, yes. They might start to believe that they can fix the abuser or even that they deserve the abuse. And these beliefs can make it incredibly difficult to leave, even when the victim knows they should.
That's so sad. But it also makes sense given the level of psychological manipulation involved. It's not about logic. It's about this deep-seated emotional connection that's been formed through this trauma.
Exactly. And it's so important to remember that trauma bonds are not a sign of weakness. They're a natural response to an unnatural and a harmful situation.
Yeah. Now, one question that I think a lot of people have is, why don't victims just report the abuse to the police? It seems like the obvious solution, but the reality is much more complicated than that.
You're absolutely right. There are many reasons why a victim might hesitate to involve law enforcement. Fear of retaliation is a huge one. Abusers often threaten their victims, making them afraid to report.
I imagine there's also a sense of shame and a fear of not being believed, right?
Definitely. Society often blames victims, questioning why they didn't leave sooner or why they put up with the abuse, and this can make victims feel incredibly isolated and hesitant to come forward.
And I bet abusers often manipulate their victims into believing that the police won't believe them or that they'll somehow be blamed for the situation.
Exactly. It's another tactic of control. It's designed to silence the victim and prevent them from seeking help.
So it's this incredibly complex web of fear, shame, manipulation, and a lack of trust in the system. It's no wonder so many victims suffer in silence.
You've painted a very accurate picture. It's crucial to approach this issue with empathy and understanding, recognizing those many barriers that prevent victims from reporting abuse.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the advice that was specifically related to leaving the relationship. One comment mentioned creating a safety plan. What does that involve?
So a safety plan is a personalized strategy for escaping an abusive situation, ensuring the victim's safety. It typically includes identifying safe places to go, securing important documents and belongings, establishing a communication system with trusted individuals, and developing a plan for financial independence.
So it's really about thinking ahead, anticipating potential challenges, and having a clear plan in place when the time is right.
Exactly. It's about empowering the victim with a sense of agency and control, giving them concrete steps that they can take when they're ready to leave.
Another piece of advice that really stood out was the suggestion to leave when the abuser isn't home. Why is that so important?
Because leaving while the abuser is present significantly increases the risk of violence. Abusers often feel a sense of ownership and control over their victims, and the act of leaving can trigger a very dangerous reaction. Leaving secretly, while difficult, is often the safest option.
I can see how that would be really emotionally challenging, but ultimately necessary for the victim's safety. It's about prioritizing survival above all else.
Precisely. It's about understanding the dynamics of abuse and taking calculated steps to minimize risk. Leaving an abusive situation is rarely simple, and it often requires a level of planning and secrecy that can be emotionally challenging but ultimately life-saving.
Okay, let's talk about legal options. Several comments mentioned restraining orders and divorce proceedings. Can you explain what those involve and how they can help victims of abuse?
Sure. A restraining order is also known as a protection order. It's a legal document issued by a court that prohibits the abuser from contacting or approaching the victim. It's a crucial tool for ensuring the victim's safety and preventing further abuse.
So it really creates a legal barrier, giving the victim a sense of security and protection.
Exactly. Violating a restraining order has serious legal consequences, providing a measure of accountability and deterring the abuser from further harassment or violence.
And divorce proceedings, I assume, are about legally dissolving the marriage and establishing boundaries for the future.
Yes. Divorce proceedings address the legal aspects of ending the marriage, including things like division of assets, custody arrangements, and spousal support. It's important to note that navigating divorce in an abusive relationship can be very complex, and it's crucial for victims to seek legal guidance from attorneys specializing in domestic violence.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another comment I found really insightful was the advice to reach out to legal aid organizations. Why is that so important, especially for victims who may be financially dependent on their abusers?
Legal aid organizations provide free or low-cost legal assistance to individuals who cannot afford an attorney. And in the context of domestic violence, they can be a crucial lifeline for victims who are financially trapped. They can offer legal guidance, advocacy, and support throughout the legal process.
So it's about leveling the playing field and ensuring that victims have access to legal representation regardless of their financial situation.
Exactly. Access to legal representation is crucial for protecting the victim's rights, securing their safety, and navigating the complexities of divorce and custody proceedings.
Reading through these comments, it's clear that leaving an abusive relationship is a process. It's not a single event. It requires careful planning, emotional resilience, and a network of support.
You're absolutely right. It's a journey of courage and self-discovery, and it's important to remember that healing takes time.
Well, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible strength and resilience of survivors of domestic violence. Leaving an abusive relationship takes immense courage, and seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
And if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please know that you are not alone. Reach out for help. Whether it's to a domestic violence hotline, a trusted friend or family member, or a mental health professional, your safety is paramount and there are resources available to support you every step of the way.
And if you are finding this deep dive helpful, be sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul and check out the Shauna Palad YouTube channel for more insightful conversations on topics just like this. We'll be right back after a short break to continue our exploration of navigating abusive relationships. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've talked about, that urgency of leaving an abusive relationship and all the complexities that can make it so difficult. But what about the aftermath? What does healing and rebuilding your life actually look like after you get out?
That's a really crucial aspect of this whole conversation. Leaving is a monumental step, but it's really just the beginning of a journey toward healing and reclaiming your life.
Definitely. One comment that really stuck with me talked about the importance of self-care after leaving an abusive relationship. Why is that so crucial?
Well, self-care is essential for both your physical and your emotional recovery. It's about, prioritizing your well-being and recognizing that you deserve care and compassion, especially after you've endured such a traumatic experience.
So it's not selfish to kind of focus on yourself during this time.
Absolutely not. It's essential. It's
Yeah.
about rebuilding your sense of self-worth and giving yourself the space and the time to heal. And this could involve things like therapy or support groups, mindfulness practices, maybe healthy eating or exercise, or even just engaging in activities that bring you joy.
So it sounds like it's really about rediscovering who you are outside of the context of that abuse.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your identity, your passions, your dreams. Abuse can often strip those things away, leaving you feeling lost and broken. And so self-care is about nurturing yourself back to wholeness.
Another piece of advice that stood out to me was the importance of setting boundaries with the abuser even after you've left the relationship. What does that look like in practice?
Well, setting boundaries is crucial for protecting both your emotional and physical well-being. It's about establishing those clear limits on communication, contact, and interactions with the abuser. This might involve blocking their phone number or avoiding places that they frequent, maybe only communicating through a lawyer or a mediator.
So it's about creating a safe space for yourself, both physically and emotionally, where you can heal and move forward without that constant fear of further manipulation or abuse.
Precisely. It's about taking back control and making choices that really prioritize your well-being.
One comment that I think is so important for survivors to hear is about not blaming yourself for the abuse.
This is a fundamental point. It is never the victim's fault. Abuse is a choice made by the abuser, and it's essential for survivors to internalize that message.
It's about recognizing that you deserve respect and that you were not responsible for the abuser's actions.
Exactly. It's about separating yourself from the abuse and reclaiming that sense of worth.
Another comment mentioned the potential for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, after experiencing domestic violence. What should survivors know about that?
PTSD is a common and often debilitating mental health condition that can develop after experiencing a traumatic event. And, domestic violence certainly qualifies as traumatic. It can manifest in a variety of ways, including things like flashbacks or nightmares, anxiety, hypervigilance, maybe emotional numbness or difficulty sleeping.
So it's not uncommon for survivors to struggle with these symptoms even after they've escaped that abusive situation.
That's right. And it's important to remember that PTSD is treatable. Seeking professional help from a therapist who specializes in trauma can be incredibly beneficial in managing those symptoms and reclaiming a sense of well-being.
One aspect of healing that I think is often overlooked is the importance of rebuilding trust, both in yourself and in others.
That's a profound observation. Abuse can so deeply erode trust, making it really difficult to feel safe and secure in relationships. Rebuilding trust takes time, it takes patience, and a conscious effort to cultivate healthy connections based on mutual respect, honesty, and open communication.
It's about taking those baby steps and allowing yourself to be vulnerable again.
Exactly. It's recognizing that, not everyone will betray your trust and that healthy, loving relationships are possible.
Therapy and support groups can play a huge role in this process, right?
Absolutely. They offer that safe space to process the trauma, to rebuild trust, and to develop those healthy coping mechanisms. They also provide a sense of community and shared understanding, which can be incredibly healing.
Yeah. As we wrap up this deep dive, I am struck by the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Even in the face of such darkness, there's always hope for healing and a brighter future.
That's such a powerful message. And if you are experiencing abuse, please know that you're not alone. Reach out for help. There are people who care and want to support you.
Remember, leaving an abusive relationship is a sign of strength. It's about choosing yourself and creating a life that is filled with safety, respect, and love.
And if this deep dive resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Voices of the Soul and checking out the Shauna Palaj YouTube channel for more insightful conversations.
Until next time, take care and remember, you are worthy of love, respect, and a life free from abuse.